Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. I was doing a little contemplating last night, as I'm prone to do, and I'm suddenly reminded of a very distinct parallel in history to our present day. You may or may not know this, but Baghdad was once a seat of learning, a beacon unto the civilized world. It was filled with scholars and architects and avant-garde people. It was literally a miracle city. Do you know what happened? The Mongols sacked it. And after the Mongols were finished, the attitude of the population changed. They went from trying to push forward their boundaries to trying to protect what knowledge they had left. Think about it. You have a house with your, Apple home office and everything, and somebody comes in, steals everything. You're going to be inclined to put in even more security and make sure what you have is better guarded. You're not looking to acquire more stuff because why bother? It's just going to get stolen in the end. And I fear we're kind of seeing a dim echo of that in modern times. Now remember, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. We all go back, about 22 years? To September 11th, 2001. When the United States went from pretty progressive, pretty forward-looking, optimistic about the future, to, oh my goodness, the world is on fire, everything is terrible, etc., etc. And we really see the rise of radical conservatism. Now, let me be clear. Silverlight has absolutely no issue with conservatism. As a matter of fact, I kind of consider myself a social liberal and a fiscal conservative. I want to give every new baby a chocolate eclair to make their life perfect. But how are we going to wind up paying for that? It's always the same old story. You need the political will and you need the money. But ever since then, we've got this rise in radical conservatism. And by that, I don't necessarily mean the guys at the top of the Republican Party, because even they're not really conservatives in the classical sense of the word. But what they are, they're heralding of movement. And it's been simmering, and I've watched it simmer. It's the same stresses that were on, 1930s Germany. The same stresses that were on 1917 Russia. And look what we got out of both of those situations, an authoritarian base. We have a leader going around saying he's going to punish the opposition, as in, instead of actually doing due process and arresting people who are corrupt, it's just whoever he feels like is his enemy, be gone with them. Ever heard of that before? Yeah. I'm afraid September 11th was the sacking of New York City. And whether it leads to the United States' decline or not is really open for questioning. Right now, the United States is still making innovations. They're still doing science, although the flat earthers and the middle earthers, by which I mean people who think we live in the center of the earth instead of on the outside, would have you believe otherwise. The conspiracy theorists have gotten so far off base, and that's because of the paranoia that was inspired by 9/11. Terrorism used to be a thing where they'd capture an airplane and want to fly it to Cuba or, Libya or some place like that. And sometimes they were bluffing and sometimes they weren't. 9/11 changed that. And now everybody in the world is a potential threat. Each and every other nation out there that hasn't signed everything they have over to the United States is a potential enemy. That type of thinking gets you in trouble pretty quick normally. The United States has two things on their side: the petrodollar, which no nation has had anything close to that before. Their currency has been accepted in many, many places, but they didn't have that lock hold over the petrodollar, that all oil must be or must have its transactions conducted in US dollars, which mean there'll always be US dollars circulating as long as there's US dollars, and they can keep enough people under their thumb. But as I said the other day, only about 11 to 12% of the United States oil comes from the Middle East. So the war isn't about oil, it's about power, just like it always is. And the United States, being a regressive force at present, is able to keep its economy going by contributing to the industrial military complex. The problem is the industrial military complex doesn't really give a lot of benefits to a lot of people. It's factory workers, okay, they're paid a reasonable amount. They're engineers, they get paid pretty decently. The executives and stuff have amazing amounts of power. But Ford contributes a lot more, and their primary target audience is regular folks like you and me. Because there's not that many militaries in the world, especially not with the ability to afford these massively overpriced, overdeveloped aircraft, ships, and helicopters, all these kinds of things. Do you know in almost every military, 1% of the total military budget goes to cover salaries. The rest is all spent on hardware and maintenance. So when you're buying a, what is it, $187 million stealth fighter, yeah, that's where the expense is, not in some poor desk sergeant or some poor captain who's trying to make do with what he's been given. But there are where the majority of the United States budget is going. NASA, you would think NASA is getting a big proportion, given that they're announcing new rockets all the time and new missions and stuff like that. But this stuff is done on a shoestring. After the 1990s, when they realized that the shuttle program wasn't as developed as they thought it was, NASA had the motto faster, better, cheaper. And they've been doing that quite well. But that's because NASA can trot out its exploration missions once or twice a year, which is their actual plan, and then just, rent from Elon Musk or even the Russians and have them do everything else. Well, they can't rent from the Russians now because of the Ukrainian incident. And see, that's the other thing, that when countries shift into a conservative mode, they get very invested in military showmanship. They love to see, the jets fly over and the parade of troops going in front of them. The Rose Bowl this year, one of the B-2s went over, and the announcers treated it like this was some sort of miraculous thing. No, a B-2, there's 21 of them, only 20 of them fly, because somebody took a bad landing and trashed one. And these guys were treating it like they didn't know. That thing's got a fighter escort somewhere. That thing has a flight pattern cleared ahead of time. Even though it can go where it needs to do, the chance that they lose one of these things is highly embarrassing. So yeah, that was all a stage and just to impress the folks at the Rose Bowl below. In the war with Ukraine, they're sending them Patriot Mark IIs. Well, the Patriot system is on its Mark IV model, I believe it. So this is literally the stuff that they had lying in the back of the inventory. Hey, we're not using these, and send them over to Ukraine. That's why it took so long to get the F-16s, because they had to drag them out of storage, repaint them, re-engineer them to make sure their equipment was up to date enough, but doesn't really showcase what the United States does. Again, this is a radical conservative opinion. Show off what our militaries can do without actually getting involved in anything. Because we know the news loves to report the bad stuff. When the Gaza terrorists first attacked Israel, it was poor Israel. And now that Israel has pretty much rooted goodness, what are the people that are down there? Anyways, they're radical conservatives. They've got them out of most things. They don't show the rockets that go into Israel every single day. Because Israel is spending a lot of money into defending their people from it. Whereas Hamas, my memory works, is spending $0 defending its civilian population and buying rockets and drones and airplanes. The Houthi rebels, Houthi, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, in Yemen, where did they get such advanced technology? And I say such advanced technology, even though it's probably 20, 30 years old. Well, where did they get it? Somebody's conservatives decided to give it to them. Radical conservatives. And they're using it the way they've been told to use it. They're shooting it over the Red Sea. They're shooting it at United States cargo planes. And, well, they haven't tried an aircraft carrier yet because those things are surrounded by really high-tech defense. But that's the way radical conservatives are. Conservatism is about preserving the past. You know what? I think in 2024, that's a valid perspective. You need a check on democracy because people are finicky. One year they could all be for legalizing marijuana it. And the next year they could all decide, nope, we don't want to. So you do need a more restrained hand to say, wait, how are we going to do this? It would be very easy during the pandemic when everything was shut down to have somebody say, let's give everybody a whole lot of money. That is a solution. You need a conservative hand in there to say, we need to make sure people are being fed, but giving them free money is probably not our best idea. And this is where we come to the problem. In the United States, there never really were these good old days. There's no golden age to return to. The 1950s and 1960s were brutal in terms of civil rights. Before that, what do you want to get into? The war years? Do you want to get into the Wild West, which only lasted 30 years? But it certainly wasn't a civilization anybody would willingly want to mimic. So conservatives don't really have this family values place to go back to. It was a horrible place where children were beaten, wives were beaten, husbands would be beaten up and left for dead in the parking lot. And that's just the way it was. When I was growing up in the 70s, things were still pretty conservative. Kids could get together and fight, and it was just, boys will be boys. Yeah, and then when they started ganging up and leaving people dying on the floor, suddenly that stopped. I'm just barely old enough to remember the days where you would go out to a nightclub or a bar and somebody would invite you to step outside. And I remember there was a few times where somebody pulled a knife. Not where I was personally, but it did happen. And that stopped people from having simple fisticuffs where somebody falls down, that's the end of it. You go back in and either you ignore each other or you buy each other a drink, whatever the case is. That's the golden age. Unfortunately, swarming attacks started about then. People started bringing knives and guns to nightclub. I don't know about you, but when I go out to have a good time, I don't think about bringing a firearm with me. I don't think about I do sometimes bring a knife, but that's because I have a multi-tool in my pocket at all times. And it isn't really a knife. But before I go in, I make sure to take it off of me. Not because I'm in the least bit afraid of the security guards, but It's just an inconvenience for everybody. But that's the way the conservatives think. The radical conservatives think, I need that firearm. I need that weapon. I need something to equalize because there's something out there. They live in a paranoia. Like I said, there's no good allies to radical conservatives. There's only people right now that they're not fighting with. And anybody who disagrees with them, oh my goodness, they will find ways to make you regret the day that you decided to mess with them, even if you're just arguing over regular, normal stuff. Radical conservatism is becoming a real problem. Neo-Nazi groups are coming out again. The KKK is coming out again. This is all stuff we do not need in 2024. We didn't need it in 1924 or 1824 or any other 24 you find on the calendar. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Now, I really doubt the proper Nazis are going to get into power. But what we may find is a few politicians with extreme right-wing leanings do find their way into power. And the problem is, once you get a couple people in the club, you can bring in your friend, and they can bring in their friend, and so on, until eventually you have a majority. This is a tried and true strategy, not only from the horrible man with a mustache in the 1930s, but churches do this all the time. In the southern United States, it's quite common for a church to decide, this is our candidate, everybody vote for them, and you're expected to vote for them. And because of that, they get their candidates and their people in power. They're the sheriff, they're whatever it might be, mayor, think of any important title. I don't know if they have aldermen down there or counselors, whatever it is. And sooner or later, you control a city council. Because the truth is, the people who tend to vote are old people and very young people, like just turned 18. The 30 to 60 crowd doesn't vote very much. And because of that, we have this eternal swing back between the left wing and the right wing, which is not really a swing at all. It's just once they get into power, they're determined to push as many politics as they can through because they know in 4 years everything can be undone. That's why the Supreme Court is such a sore point at the moment, because it's been heavily influenced one way. And when they struck down Roe versus Wade, which I think was a terrible decision, but that's me because I think it's a woman's right to choose. I have no business in that, and that's just me personally. I'm not saying you have to share my opinion. I'm saying that's my personal opinion. And also because I don't want to take on the responsibility of somebody else's body for me making that decision. Hell no. I've had enough problems making good decisions with my own body, much less somebody else's. And I think it's insane that anybody would give themselves that power. But that's what the Supreme Court in the United States did. The conservatives were waiting for that because they had legislation with trapdoors in it. So that way, once it was legal, all these other provisions passed. So even if you reverse it back, that's a whole lot of legal framework. And it was all contributed by this right wing, we're here for family values mindset. Well, no, you're not there for family values. You're there to run a country. And if you feel it's your choice or your right to interfere in somebody else's choice in any way, shape, or form, aside from completely there to protect somebody, like, yeah, kids don't do drugs, it's not good. But instead, they've handcuffed themselves into looking back to the past and trying to protect a legacy that never existed. There were no laws preventing the termination of an unwanted pregnancy until the 1930s and 1940s. So, we're not striking down this ancient law. We're We're striking down this law that shouldn't have been put in the first place. And that's unfortunately the way the conservatives think. They know what the past was like, even if they've never studied it or even paid attention to it, and they're going to shove that down your throat. Now, liberals are not always loosey-goosey happy people that go along and smoke their marijuana and keep people, cool and breezy and that's all folks kind of deal. No, there's good and bad people on both sides. I'm just saying that 9/11 caused the conservatives to really refocus their efforts. And 2008 and 2016, that whole era of chaos, which you can't blame on the president. There were so many factors that, again, if the president had gotten involved, he would have been labeled a communist and probably, chased out of office. He did the best with what he could. The president that came from 2016 to 2020 caused so many problems and is still causing problems. We have to watch that we don't allow somebody like that in who's just going to parrot what everybody else wants him to say, and then he's going to reinterpret the law however he likes, just as he did before. With that, like I said, this has all been done before in history. Look at Baghdad, once the jewel of the Middle East, and now it's sadly not. Just because some outside invaders got a foothold one day and left them with nothing. The United States is in the process of not tearing itself apart, but reducing itself to that level. And I really hope they find something to hope for again. Again, I remember the 90s. It was a period of prosperity. There were a lot of good things. But there were unique circumstances that allowed it to happen. We probably won't ever see a time like that again, but we need to get out of this extreme right-wing downward spiral. With that, we hope you enjoyed this episode today. If you did, please like, share, because sharing is caring. If you haven't pressed the subscribe button, please subscribe. If you click the bell icon, you'll be notified every time that we publish a new episode. We hope you have a fantastic day.